and sort of looking, and the aim kind of is, to find something that overflows all these compartmentalizations. And the tricky thing about critic and curator in relation to the artist, I feel, is that the artist can be a curator or a critic, but the critic or the curator cannot necessarily be an artist. So, and the other thing with that I feel like feeds back into the studio and this this move into a non-studio-based practice that seems to be happening more and more. And also images by large, not really, which I feel like, especially with our slides, is that that images aren't necessarily photocentric, that we're dealing more with a phenomenological or psychological notion of what an image is, which I think Seal brought up with that it's a mental image, an impression. And for me, that's something that's, then the image becomes something that takes root, that however fleeting, however instantaneous, it's something that takes root. And I don't know, I think that with the studio and what kind of work you make, it sort of just goes back to the essential image and not really what you're making. Because we're also in a time where we're post-media art. People don't always say, oh, I'm a bit something like that. Everybody seems to be slightly
right.
If I can try to address the question, Lyle, I think, or I hope, that being an artist is the best way to be both inefficient and unreliable, and partly because we're forcing ourselves to engage questions of authorship constantly, and that's almost it becomes increasingly an impossible quandary, authorship, and so we're forced by beating our heads against this constantly to be reliably unreliable, efficiently non-efficient, inefficient, and actually, I think being an artist is a better way to do that, to be unreliable and inefficient, than to be a student or a teacher, because we're still answering questions, we're still finishing semesters, we're still getting and giving grades and all of that stuff. That's all of that's very important to me, to be as messy.
Okay, I think we're going to open it up to the floor for questions. That goes to the panel as well, if you have any internal questions you'd like to ask.
Yeah, before we do that, I just want to say one thing. When Roy says that everybody is an artist, that would seem to sanction the idea that in fact art school is irrelevant. Okay? If everybody's already an artist, what do we need an art school for? Right? Hierarchies are finished. If the whole notion of value and quality and all those kinds of things that are socially determined are sort of out the window or really diffuse, then why do we need the kind of legitimation that goes on here? I would propose, and maybe this will influence some of the questions that come our way, I would propose that if everyone is an artist, then art school becomes the most important kind of education that you can have. Because it is about developing the understanding of the world through art and through the images that are made in art in our heads. And there is no other place except in art school where that is front and center. And particularly this issue of the connection between language and image. This is the place where that should happen, and this is the place where it should be the most important thing. We are too used to thinking of ourselves as marginal. We're too used to thinking of our operations as out of step, deliberately so, with the rest of the world, because hey, that's what we are, that's what we do. We're supposed to be out of step. But in fact, I think just the opposite is true. So that's my rant, and I'm sticking to it.
I would add also that it's true that everyone is an artist, but not everyone makes art. And I think that think you brought that up before, that, everyone may think about taking pictures of looking off different monuments, but not everyone will do it. And it's that action that creates the art.
I have always thought that art is the highest value in human life. It isn't about misleading, it's about experiencing. It takes you very far and very high. That's all I have to say.
Stephen Freely's going to pass around the microphone.
Question.
Any questions?
A physical image, the printed image is something real. What makes it more real than an image on a screen? Because it is flat, instead of pixels, it's ink. I didn't even think about it until you posed it, but what makes a printed image real?
Well, I don't know about real as much as I was trying to give consensus that the printed image gives it a certain importance. As far as reality, I think Silvio and I discussed how interesting that because of a screen, how it's sort of created a universal surface for artworks, and what that kind of does, even as opposed to inkjet to a C-print, what something being ingrained in the paper as opposed to laying on top of it.
Also, to respond to your question, I would say that the reality, or the value of the printed image is the fact that a commitment has been made to devote a fixed and defined section of space, regardless of its flatness, to one image. What separates the screen from the piece of paper covered in ink or collection of dyes and chemicals and paper and traditional photographic paper is that the screen is ephemeral. The screen could theoretically, in a given space of time, display an infinite amount of images. But it is that commitment and that investment into permanent existence that gives legitimacy to this image. Yes, and I'm actually thinking specifically of the cost of committing a section of space to one image. And that's why I think that is where the inherent value of not only the printed image lies, but also film. That is what contributes to the nostalgia and the magic of film, is that it is that image printed on that sort of media is a commitment and a fixed, non-ephemeral existence.
I'd kind of like to turn that question on its head, though.
Yeah, I just agree.
Sure. Well, I would say that besides the obvious physical palpability of the printed image versus, something that's on the screen, there's now ways to make an image interactive within the screen. And I guess my kind of reaction to that is an image that's interactive on a digital, medium, is that a more real image than one that even would be a printed image, or one that doesn't have the interactive component, the ability to create another image within an image or have a multiplicity of images?
I'm interacting right now.
It's a different sort of interaction, obviously. That's a
reality. I
palpability.
think it's actual reality and virtual reality. And even the question, the thing of having a physical thing and having it be in real space and cost, that's just, that becomes an economic and a real estate issue, which you could arguably extend to the internet because there's rights that there's which country you're in and what kind of censorship and all these other, So the way I see it is that it's just two different kinds of reality.
Right.
And we have invites on the internet and they function just as well as physical invites. And we don't make the distinction anywhere else. So
I just have another thought too. Sometimes when these conversations tend towards these is an image that we interact with more of an image than an image that we don't, or an image on paper more of an image than an image on a screen. I start to kind of get a little squirmy because basically, I mean, they're all images. And one of the reasons I wanted to talk about language earlier is sort of try and connect visual images to other forms of language. Is that there's really this whole universe, and we start to break it down and categorize it to try and understand it. But ultimately, the only way to really know what we're talking about is to talk in terms of particular cases. They're not big generalities. There's this image that you make, or that image that I make, or this object that I make, and how does that operate? You know, it's like in written language we have, you know, poems and literature, and we have pornography and craft and all kinds of stuff. But it's the same thing is true with the stuff that you guys all generate, that, you know, the people on the panel generate. And it's, you know, it's wonderful to think in terms of these generalities, and it's important to raise the questions that, you know, that we're dealing with here. But it's also really important for all of us, and you, students, teachers, whatever, to think very carefully and precisely about the work that you're making. I mean, to not sort of forget the importance of description, which is always about particulars. It's not just about these generalities.
So, in regards to like the particularities of it, like when you put something on a screen, you've lost a huge amount of control of like defining points of your image. You know, like what paper you're using, the media type, colors, all of that. Like, does that bother? Is that a problem for everyone, or is that fine? We let that go and not bother?
It's a problem for me. I talked to Stephen about bodies of work that just won't display properly unless you make sure that it's right. And sometimes you don't trust other people. I have a calibrated monitor, I don't know if you do, you know, but the work that I'm showing, I can't guarantee that it's going to be shown the way that I want it to be shown. So in regards to the internet, I just won't show it. Because if it's work that I care that much about, that I want that much control over, it's not worth putting out there to be shown in an incorrect way.
Yeah, that seems to me to be the right response too. I mean, Steele is talking about the encounter with the actual specific particular thing or set of or experience or whatever it is. That's not a generalization. And if you have decisions to make, those are your decisions, right? Not somebody else's, they're not the machine's decision. They're yours. And when you make those decisions, you kind of got to stick by them, if that's important to you, like it is to, like it is to Mitch.
And even the conversation they have on the internet and how they may change conversations, or what conversations they're having with other photos beyond a blog or whatever. And I think that, for me, that's even more important than maybe the screen doesn't look exactly like it looks on my monitor, but you know, this photo is totally out of context next to
Sure. It's another issue, right?
Well, yeah, you Google Randy West, who's a faculty member in the MFA department, you might get some interesting images considering there's another Randy West with another
very different
profession.
Yes. Orientation toward reality.
Yeah.
There's a question over here.
Microphone.
You guys can't hear me.
No.
Okay. So it's brought up a lot, like numbers of images that are produced, and like quantity, and people are using the words like suffocating, like stuff like that. And I was just curious, like why the creation of images is like in mass amount is like a negative thing, like that there are several images out there in the world, like millions. Like why is that negative when like we're image creators? Who like want to add to that? Like it's not, you might not have an answer, but it seems to always be a negative thing that there are billions of images.
Right, you say tsunami like it's a bad thing.
Yeah.
I wanted to just follow up so we can, mine's kind of in the same vein as that. we were all focused in the whole panel always so many images on the internet and we have to go through them on screens and stuff like that. But this isn't like a new issue, in the context of images. If you look into art form, your images are in a different place than they're on the wall of the gallery. And I'm wondering why there's this such a, you want to piggyback on that? Why there's so much, let me finish.
No one is holding a gun to your head saying, look at these images. And don't stop. We like them, and being an artist is fun.
Other people on the panel may have other ways of bringing it up or thinking about it, but I'll just sort of respond because I'm sort of the first person maybe who started talking about numbers. I have no problem about there being, 1.7 million images generated by this particular thing, or there's just profusion or the terabytes, as Brock mentioned, of images. That's not the issue. It's just that there isn't that capacity. There's no value judgment implied to that. But we live in a world where everybody is generating an enormous number of images relative to, say, the generation before you or when I was growing up or whatever. And that sometimes there may be an assumption that just because something is an image, it's worth something or it means something. And it's almost like saying, well, a word means something kind of independent of its context or its history or anything. In my view, there's no value judgment. It's just that it is part of our landscape now in a different way than it was for generations before. And it's going to be different even, for you guys 20 years down the road, there's going to be a very different relationship to an individual image in all likelihood.
Yeah, I'll just first in the testimony. This side, one of the things that's been very clear to me over the last few years from teaching at SBA is again, I'm not saying tsunami life is a bad thing. I think that it's the water we're swimming in. And it's got an enormous upside, no question about it. Somebody like Forrest Royce is totally plugged into the notion that, hey, this isn't necessarily a bad thing. It's neither good nor bad. It's just a reality that, we have to negotiate and navigate. And that's true for everybody who's making movies too. It's not just, curmudgeon faculty who are going, no, it's not that at all. It's just a reality we have to deal with.
I want to contribute something to complicate matters. This isn't an answer or a question, but I think it could be helpful to try to think about the internet as not the internet. So to provide a specific example, Steele, I'm thinking about this particular icon of Mary that I saw, and I think it was the 2004 Byzantine show at the Met. I think it was the second round of the Byzantine shows there. And on the placard, it said that this painting, this icon of Mary, included several authors, and the giltwork, the gold giltwork, that was covering over part of the painting. So we're not seeing the totality of the work and artwork that's gone into this painting. So it's been interacted with. And also that giltwork, the name for that clicking, I'm going to say clicking like the internet, that clicking away on the painting was also called prayer. And so just to complicate things or sort of get things maybe out of our present frustrations with how much time we spend on the internet, I just wanted to complicate things by imagining this icon of Mary as the internet, as an analogous internet. And if we can think about this idea of interactivity as maybe having the same problems or possibilities as prayers, the ubiquity of images and the ubiquity of wishes, and it doesn't make any wish or image any less viable, that the world is completely full of them. But I don't know, maybe we can talk about Mary icons as well as the internet.
as a teacher, I find very beneficial when I can to keep the same picture on the screen for 20 minutes, 25, sometimes 30 minutes. Because so many new layers of meanings come up, and that's the reason why I have real difficulties in flipping images on the internet all the time. I'm not saying it's negative, but the way you approach your attitude is completely different. When you keep your eyes still on one rectangle, you may be embarrassed in the beginning, but slowly, the image begins to talk to you, and you respond. So you create this relationship which can be very magic, because the image is there for you, and you find all these layers and layers of meanings, they're all in there, up for you to be recognized and revealed. So that's a different attitude towards the way you can experience the image, rather than images in a multitude.
Does anyone have any further questions? Thank you for coming.